Hello, this is Matt Caddo, Senior Fellow in Public Policy with the American Kratom Association. I wanted to give you a legislative report here on June 22nd, 2020. And we're going to try to do more of these video reports because we know that the advancements in communication strategies are really based on social media, and videos tend to be consumed by the public at a higher rate than written communication. So we're going to add this video program about legislative updates as we go forward. Today I wanted to talk about a couple of important things. Everyone in America knows that the cascading effect of the coronavirus and now the George Floyd social justice crises has immersed all of us and consumed all of us in those particular situations that has crowded out many of the discussions that we were hoping to have about the kratom and its legality going forward in the United States. It is the reality of what we face today when these kinds of events emerge that overtake and consume all of the bandwidth for public policy officials. We found that was true with the state Kratom Consumer Protection Act proposals that we had actively being considered in about 21 states, of which we expected about a dozen would have favorably passed some version of a state KCPA. But that was overtaken by the coronavirus. And as legislators started to reconvene for those that had not closed down entirely for the summer, or for the year rather, we found that they are talking about budgets and how they allocate reduced revenues across a very broad section of needs. And those discussions are difficult for state legislators, and those fights consume a lot of the time that would otherwise be provided for issues like ours. And then, of course, they're fighting about how they allocate the health resources that are necessary in order to control and to contain the coronavirus. On top of that, we had the George Floyd impact. And those are really difficult issues that deal with social justice and some of the systemic racism problems that exist in our society today. Those are things that, again, will consume a great deal of time and effort and thought with state legislators that crowd out the discussions about the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. That's the reason why we created the Kratom Consumer Council, because as these discussions are being taken up and as I said, crowded out by some of the more emergency kinds of issues that have arisen, we still need to maintain a critical communication channel with the offices of these state legislators and members of Congress, both in the House and the Senate. And the Kratom Consumer Council is the pathway to do that, so that when we have our issues percolate to the top of the agendas, that we're prepared and ready with a solid information base that will allow these public elected officials to actually take action. We're looking for the actual filing of the federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act in the early fall. We are continuing to work with members of Congress in order to educate them about kratom and what it is. We find oftentimes, even today, many do not know exactly what it is, and most are influenced by the very negative messaging that's been disseminated by the Food and Drug Administration. And even during the coronavirus, the team of people that work on public policies has been filling the disinformation channel to the staff in the Congress about kratom, and they take every opportunity to do that. And so we have to be ready to fight back, to punch back. And we do that with programs like the Kratom Consumer Council. And so we're going to continue to do that, and we encourage everyone to stay engaged and work with us as we move forward. We also have a number of issues that are of significance in the states right now. All of you probably know about the problem in Ohio, where the Department of Agriculture in Ohio has said that they are going to ban all kratom products that are either in capsule, pill, or beverage form, and allow only powdered products to be sold in outlets, and only then if there is no labeling or marketing materials that suggest that those kratom powder products are for human consumption. This is all derivative of the problem we have with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, where they are making claims about kratom which are outrageously false, and yet they continue to do so. And they suck into that vortex of disinformation organizations and state regulatory agencies like the Department of Agriculture in the state of Ohio. We are currently working with the governor's office. We've retained a group of attorneys and consultants there to help us. And we are going to challenge officially the rationale that the Department of Agriculture and their Food Safety Division in Ohio have made in order to ban these kratom products. We think that they're wrong on the science, they're definitely wrong on the policy, and they're wrong to listen to the FDA on this particular issue. Some good news is that Utah has finalized their kratom rule, which establishes the framework for the implementation of Senator Kurt Bramble's state of Utah bill, that first one in the country that allowed for the appropriate regulation of kratom products to protect consumers. The rule actually has some implications for manufacturers, some of which will not be welcomed in the vendor community, because it requires those vendors to follow the good manufacturing practices that are established for foods and dietary ingredients here in the United States. Sadly, some vendors have elected not to follow those rules. And you will hear complaints from some vendors that say, oh, well, the American Kratom Association is going overboard. They are being too tough. They are the mini FDA. Well, actually, what we are trying to do is to create a safe environment of quality products for consumers. And if a vendor in the United States who is manufacturing a kratom product fails to comply with the FDA good manufacturing practices for food and dietary ingredients, they should not be in the marketplace. And that's a fact. And any to complain about the regulations, they merely have to look at the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, where if the FDA were doing their job properly, they would already be regulated under those standards. We can't give sanctuary to anyone who wants to be in this business and is unwilling to make the investment in order to provide safe, quality kratom products. If they're not willing to test on a regular basis, if they're not willing to go to the expense of validating and certifying that their products are free from the contaminants and free from the adulterants that are part of the problem, then they should not be in business. And I will say that directly to them. Gratefully, there are a number of vendors who have stepped to the plate, have voluntarily agreed to comply, and have submitted to third-party audits to validate their manufacturing processes to demonstrate that they conform with these GMPs that mirror the FDA requirements for food and dietary ingredient products. That's important. And anyone in the kratom world that's looking for where can I buy a safe kratom product, they should go to the AK website and look at those qualified vendors, and those are good bets that your risks of buying an adulterated or contaminated product are dramatically reduced when a company commits to follow those regulations. The state of Utah's rule will be replicated across the country as new KCPAs are passed by state legislatures. So those vendors that are out of compliance now had better find a way to come into compliance, or they should find another business to be in, because we at AKA are about protecting consumers, not protecting vendors that don't want to comply with the FDA rules and with good manufacturing practices that protect consumers. There's also been some alerts provided within the community about some federal legislation that all of us should be concerned about, but whether we should be concerned about it right now is the question. One of those is HR 2580, known as the Modernizing Drug Enforcement Act of 2019. It's important to note here that the legislative process can sometimes in the United States Congress be very complicated. And in this case, HR 2580, sponsored by Phil Rowe, a Republican of Tennessee, and Tom Suozzi, a Democrat of New York, is a complicated issue because it attempts to implicate all opioid-like substances, and potentially, though it does not mention kratom, could implicate kratom as well. The complication of this legislation is illustrated when a bill gets assigned by the House of Representatives Speaker's Office to two committees, which this one has. It shows that it has cross-jurisdictional issues that are going to have to be resolved before it can move. And remember, we are now in June of 2020. This bill has been on the docket for more than a year. We worked on it when it was first filed, and we have worked hard to educate members of the staffs of the House Judiciary Committee and the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the Judiciary Committee, the bill was referred there by the Speaker, and it was immediately assigned to the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security, which typically deals with opioids and the kind of problems that are associated with opioid consumption, and then to the Committee on Energy and Commerce, to the Subcommittee on Health in that committee. And that committee looks at the implications on consumers and their safety. And so those two committees have had this bill on their agendas since May the 9th, the day after it was filed, 2019, and there has not been a single hearing that's been convened. And in June of 2020 through December of 2020, which is the last effort or opportunity that would be available for HR 2580 to be considered, it's not likely that it will see the light of day in any time in the near future. It will have to be refiled in the new legislative session. So why is the alert raised today about it? Well, we live in a free country, and certainly people have the First Amendment right to do whatever they want in terms of expressing concerns about issues that are important. And certainly HR 2580 is something of concern, but it seems a little bit irresponsible for someone to raise the red flag of warning today about a piece of legislation that has zero chance of being enacted in this legislative session in the United States Congress. That's a fact. Now, it is possible, and we watch this closely, that some piece of legislation can be added on as a rider to other legislation that is going through the United States Congress. That's why we watch it carefully every day and have been watching this particular bill for the last year. We don't see any evidence that that's going to happen, nor is there an appetite currently by the sponsors to try to push it through, except that you were encouraged, some in the community were encouraged by a well-intentioned effort by a blogger who suggested that you should write directly to Congressman Rowe, telling him about your personal experiences in that Kratom has saved your lives. Great, and we think that's a wonderful chance, but it sort of implicates and creates problems in two areas. One is, why poke the bear? There's no reason for anyone to be concerned about this bill currently. We have been tracking, and by the way, no one asked us about at the AKA about our current posture or the status of it, given our lobbying network. And so really poking the bear in this instance might revitalize the interest in this legislation by the staff in Congressman Rowe's office. And so strategically, I think that was a mistake in order to encourage people to send emails. The positive stories are obviously important, and we will have to use those now that this issue has been raised with Representative Rowe's office to push back again on why the premise of this bill, which would obviously potentially impact Kratom along the way. The second problem it has is with advocate fatigue. All of us want to do every single thing we can in order to protect the Kratom plant in terms of its legality and to ensure access of consumers to quality and safe Kratom products. When we raise red flags consistently and we ask people to do any number of things, send an email, sign a petition, or to become an advocate, it can have the debilitating effect of people getting tired of it or getting simply, it's just too difficult to be a part of this advocacy organization. That's the reality. That's why we at AKA formed the KCC, the Kratom Consumer Council, because we wanted to consolidate and make our efforts on an advocacy front more efficient, not waste the time of advocates, and to train them up so that they can most effectively advocate for Kratom in their individual communities, in their congressional districts, and their states. So while I'm critical of the effort that was launched by this blogger, I think it was a mistake on their part. They have the right to do so. We ask the advocates to just be a little discriminating about responding to those kinds of appeals. The second issue that was raised, again by this blogger in this particular case, was the issue about Kratom in Indonesia. There is no question that the Indonesia Kratom issue is a volatile one. But remember, Indonesia was dramatically impacted by the coronavirus as well. And so their bandwidth in terms of public policy discussions is really consumed about how they are going to protect their people from the coronavirus, and all of the essential components of a public health campaign are going to be a part of that. Now, they have in Indonesia the same problem that we have in the United States, and that is there is a powerful agency that is hell-bent to ban kratom in Indonesia. That's the BNN. It's the equivalent of our DEA, but their regulatory authority is different. And in this case, the BNN really is a proxy for the FDA. The BNN in Indonesia has repeated over and over again the disinformation campaign about kratom that was launched by and the pipeline that is filled consistently by the FDA with bad information, inaccurate information, and frankly, information that's just plain wrong about kratom. But against that, we have, in working in cooperation with various other agencies and ministries in Indonesia, including the President's office, have been able to push back with the Ministry of Health that originally, just like the DEA in the United States, originally supported the FDA's recommendation for scheduling and NIDA's recommendation for scheduling. We've been able to turn around the NIDA people with the facts, with the science. And we've done that with the Ministry of Health in Indonesia. And today, the Ministry of Health is actively involved in researching kratom, just as the NIDA people are. And we're collaborating with them in helping for that research to be disseminated in the appropriate places for policymakers to see the truth about kratom. We worked with the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Finance, all of whom, for their individual portfolios of regulatory authority in Indonesia, recognize that the last thing that they want to do is to decimate the economy even further in Indonesia by taking away a significant agricultural crop that generates a lot of income to a very otherwise impoverished section and sector of their economy. So we're confident that as we are able to continue these negotiations, we have a planned trip to Indonesia as soon as the international routing opens up and we can safely go there, where a delegation from the American Kratom Association will be confirming with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Finance, and we will meet with the BNN while we're there. So that's the truth about what's happening in Indonesia right now. The deadlines are real. There have been multiple attempts by the BNN to squeeze down on when the actual drop dead date is for the banning of kratom agricultural production is in Indonesia. But we know that there's sufficient internal political subdivision opposition generated there too. So the growing regions, much like we have states here in the United States, pushing back against the federal government when they make mistakes, the same is true in Indonesia. Those government representatives, the governors of those regions, are pushing back hard with the parliament in Indonesia, with their legislature, and with the president's office. And we think that they are making substantial progress in order to educate everyone in a policy arena about the importance of kratom to their local communities and to their economies. And against that, we see Thailand moving very quickly to not only decriminalize kratom in Thailand, but also to develop a new export capacity so that they will be competitors to Indonesia. And I can assure you that given the balance of trade deficit that Indonesia is now suffering from as a result of the coronavirus, that they are going to see on the horizon the potential that they will lose this significant export capacity and the income derived from it if they're not careful, with Thailand opening up their marketplace while those at the BNN are trying to restrict it within Thailand. It is important to note that we do not disagree in any way with the domestic policy that Indonesia may come to with respect to their cultural and their own issues that they deal with drug problems in the country of Indonesia. They can intelligently come to those decisions on their own, and we don't seek to interpose our judgment on it, only to keep the export channel available to us, because we know that kratom can be used safely as long as it's not adulterated or contaminated by American consumers. And to the extent that that experience is useful to and helpful to the Indonesian government in formulating their own domestic policy, we will continue to collaborate and share those messages with them. I'm also pleased to report that the Centers for Disease Control portal on accepting comments on those who are trying to manage acute and chronic pain had an outstanding participation by kratom advocates who told their passionate stories about how kratom has saved their lives or dramatically improve the quality of their life because of its availability. Even the most cynical in Washington would have to agree that the people that are speaking to this issue of acute and chronic pain are including consistently experiences about kratom. I know that it was disappointing to some who are promoters of opioid therapies for acute and chronic pain, which we don't oppose, by the way. We think if opioids work for people, they should be able to use them. But we also believe that those who find kratom as an option, an effective option in dealing with acute and chronic pain, they should be able to do so. But ultimately, it becomes harder and harder for the Washington establishment to ignore these pleas of people who are safely using kratom as a valuable tool in the opioid addiction marketplace. And certainly, it speaks to the veracity of the National Institute on Drug Abuse position that says we ought to study kratom, that it should not be banned. And so this was a great event for the kratom community, and thanks to every one of you who participated. I understand that there were thousands of comments, a significant number of which were relating kratom experiences. So that's terrific news all around. Finally, let me just say that while I have been somewhat critical of the messages that are being sent by some within the kratom community, we welcome everyone's participation. We think that this advocacy has to be done responsibly. And we have seen in the past examples where we have simply stepped on our foot, well, perhaps even shot ourselves in the foot when we get cross-messaging occurring. And that's why we're so concerned about it. Perfect example was one of the, a new group that emerged completely out of the landscape several years ago and started to lobby on the CITSA bill, actually convinced the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, then Bob Goodlatte, that the kratom community supported the CITSA bill. It would have been disastrous. So we encourage everyone to coordinate and cooperate. They don't have to listen to every single thing that we say, but certainly there ought to be some level of cooperation rather than going off on their own and creating these cross messages that sometimes provide conflicting information, sometimes diminish our capacity in order to keep advocates energized, and sometimes deliver the wrong message to these public policy officials in the United States government, whether they be Senate staffers, House staffers, or members of Congress itself. We thank everyone in the kratom community who works so hard to keep this plant legal. We thank everyone for their passion, and we commit to you that we will work tirelessly in order to protect the freedom of American consumers to make informed decisions about acquiring safe and unadulterated kratom products. Thanks, and I look forward to the next legislative update, which should happen in a week or so. Thanks so much.